All right, so what we're going to talk about next are biogeochemical cycles. We're actually going to talk about three cycles in this video. We're going to talk about, it's still part of TEAC 4C, which is diagram abiotic cycles, and then we're going to talk about the carbon, phosphorus, and nitrogen cycles today. So the first thing I want to talk about are some vocabulary terms that you might have heard before in biology. The first one is abiotic. So abiotic means non-living. So some examples of that are going to be water, air, rocks, and soil. All of those things are not alive. The next vocab term I'm going to talk about is biotic, which means living, kind of like biology, the study of life. And this is going to be animals, plants, any living organism. All right, so make sure you've written these vocab or these words down in your notes. Anything red, bold, underline is what is going to go on your notes page. All right, so nutrient cycling. Matter is going to cycle through the environment. It can be transformed, but cannot be created or destroyed. And nutrients are matter that organisms require for life processes that circulates throughout the environment in biogeochemical cycles. The first cycle we're going to talk about today is the carbon cycle. I'm going to give you kind of an overview of the carbon cycle in this big image, and then I'll go to a more simpler one, and that's what you're going to use to fill in your notes. So the way that we get carbon in our atmosphere is through the burning of fossil fuels, volcanoes, and other geological processes. The largest reservoir of carbon is actually in sedimentary rock, okay, and then the second largest is going to be in our oceans. So the reason that our largest reservoir or storage area of carbon is in sedimentary rock is because when organisms die in water, the remains may settle in sediments. Okay. And then the way they release carbon back into the atmosphere is through erosion and other volcanic eruptions. Okay. And then we also have the second largest is in the oceans. All right. They absorb carbon through the atmosphere from runoff, undersea volcanoes, wastes, and remains of organisms. Okay. This little image up here kind of shows our other process, photosynthesis and cellular respiration. All right, and kind of that's what's happening here in the ocean on the side. It also happens on land. You might remember these two processes from biology. So photosynthesis is when plant makes their own energy. Cellular respiration is when plants and animals make their own energy, and they're related. Okay, so this is what you're going to use to fill in your notes. So we're going to start here where plants and producers are taking in CO2, carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, and they're making their own energy, or glucose, C6H12O6. Organisms take up that carbon when they eat plants. Organisms are going to release carbon dioxide from cellular respiration to make their energy, so that's a process that we as animals go through. Decomposition is going to release that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, so when organisms die, they decompose, and that organic material is going to return to the system. Bodies of organisms that are not decomposed become part of fossil fuel deposits. So that's going to be an example of oil, coal, natural gas. We humans use fossil fuels for energy, heat, and gas. And then the process of combustion is what is going to release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Okay, so make sure you've filled in your notes based on these blanks on your notes handout. So some human impacts from carbon. So through fossil fuels, we're removing carbon from the lithosphere, and then the burning of those fossil fuels is going to release carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Forest cutting and burning. So whenever we cut down or burn anything in the forest, it's going to release that carbon storage from plants back into the atmosphere. And it's going to reduce, if we're cutting or clearing out large areas, it's reducing the number of plants we have available to use carbon dioxide, because plants help with that excess carbon dioxide we have. And if we're taking away those plants, it can be very detrimental. Producers cannot absorb enough carbon dioxide to keep up with human activities. Okay. We're creating more than they can take in. And then carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is a major cause of climate change. So climate change is what we're going to talk about later on in this unit or in this class. But all that excess carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is going to be a major cause of climate change. So make sure you've filled in your notes with red, bold, underlined words, and we're going to go on to our next cycle. The next cycle we're going to talk about is the nitrogen cycle. So same thing, this is going to be a big overview, and then I'm going to talk about it in a simpler image on the next slide. Okay. So with nitrogen, nitrogen is going to make most of our atmosphere. All right. So nitrogen gas cannot cycle out of the atmosphere into organisms. Nitrogen is actually scarce in some of our spheres, like the lithosphere, hydrosphere, and in organisms. Okay, so nitrogen has to go through a kind of fix, it's called nitrogen fixation, to become usable. So it can be fixed by lightning, and it can be fixed by other specialized bacteria. So one of those, the specialized bacteria that can actually fix nitrogen from its gaseous form into ammonia is called, is found in legumes. So sometimes farmers will plant certain crops in with their crops to kind of help get that nitrogen to their crops. Okay, and that's kind of what you see here is this fixation, and it is converted into ammonium, which is converted into nitrates and the nitrites, and then it's used by plants, and it kind of goes through this cycle. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at a simpler image to kind of talk through this cycle. So like I said, most nitrogen is going to be found in the atmosphere as a gas. So we're going to start here with nitrogen fixing bacteria. So it's found on some plant roots, and they help fix the atmospheric nitrogen to be useful to plants. Animals will eat those plants to obtain nitrogen. Decomposers are going to break down dead organisms and release the nitrogen back into the soil. Ammonium is created by that nitrogen-fixing bacteria and decomposers. And then bacteria is going to convert that ammonium into nitrates and then back into nitrogen gas. So that nitrogen gas is going to be released back into the atmosphere. It's a simpler image than the previous slide. It kind of shows how nitrogen is cycled. So make sure you filled in the red and yellow words on this slide on your handout. Okay, human impacts from nitrogen. So burning of fossil fuels, it's going to increase nitric oxide, or NO, in our atmosphere. It's going to react forming nitrogen dioxide, which can lead to acid rain. So that kind of changes the water chemistry and will make that precipitation coming down more acidic. So you kind of see it in this image here with these leaves. And then another process from nitrogen, or too much nitrogen, is going to be eutrophication. So fertilizers contain nitrogen. When they're used, runoff water picks up extra nitrogen and carries it into nearby water systems. Because it's a fertilizer and there's tiny aquatic plants and large aquatic plants found in waterways, it can result in what we call algal blooms. So they're taking in all that dissolved oxygen found in water and can cause fish kills because fish need oxygen just like we do. And when they use up all that oxygen, not only fish that die, but other organisms can die as well. So make sure you've filled in all your notes with these red words, and we're going to move on to our final cycle, which is the phosphorus cycle. All right, so the phosphorus cycle. This one's a little bit different too, and it's our last large image, and I'm going to show you this one before we move on to the one you're filling in for your notes. So phosphorus is actually only released when rocks are worn away by wind or water, and that's because most phosphorus is going to be found in our rock. So the amount available is actually very low. Plants take up phosphorus only through their roots when it's dissolved in water. So that's where you kind of see the uptake here, the uptake through the soil here on the land versus the water. Okay. Consumers acquire phosphorus from the water we drink and organisms that we eat. The waste is going to return phosphorus to the soil from decomposers. Okay, so that's kind of where you see here. All right, so this is a giant, or just an overview of the phosphorus cycle. We're going to go through it. Next slide. Okay, so here is a breakdown of the phosphorus cycle. So once I said it, like I said, most phosphorus is going to be stored in rocks. Plants take up dissolved phosphorus from the soil in their roots. Runoff water is going to carry that phosphorus from soil into nearby bodies of water. Okay. Animals drink water and get phosphorus. Animals eat plants and get phosphorus, so that's the only way that they can obtain phosphorus. And then decomposers are going to break down those dead organisms and their waste, returning that phosphorus to that soil. So that's kind of our cyclical pattern that we have going on here. Okay. So on the slide, make sure you have the red words and yellow words filled in on your notes page. And then our last slide is going to be about human impacts for phosphorus. Okay, so just like nitrogen, phosphorus can actually cause eutrophication. It's going to, if there's a lot of phosphorus going in, it's going to create more producers, and it's going to decrease that water's oxygen content as well. We have phosphorus in fertilizers and detergents, and it can be picked up by runoff. So runoff is when, after it rains, if not all of that water is absorbed in the soil or kind of percolates down to be stored in an aquifer, it becomes runoff. And so all of that excess, these excess nutrients, if there's too much of it entering a waterway, it's going to create a problem. Okay, and then mining is going to break up rocks and minerals, making it easy to dissolve and run off and enter bodies of water that way as well. Okay, so make sure this is the end of your notes. Make sure you filled them all in, and that is it for biogeochemical cycles.